Okay. Right. So yes, it's Darwin Day today, and you're standing next to Darwin himself.
Indeed, yeah, it's a privilege.
It is. So James, what are your general thoughts on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution to start with?
I distinguish.
Well, Charles Darwin wasn't the first person to suggest that creatures changed over time, so he didn't really invent the idea of evolution. He did come up with the mechanism for it, natural selection, which, I mean, I agree with a lot of other people who said that this is really a revolutionary concept and has enabled us to understand how exactly you can have such a emergence of diversity of animal forms for different niches without any need for a sort of guiding hand to the process. So it's quite an amazing accomplishment, I think.
But it must have really changed the, I guess, challenged people's zeitgeist or their thoughts about how their origins when the original idea came into being. Since then there's been quite a lot of science which has given the idea a lot more sort of material behind it. So what do you think about the evolution of sort of human thought around the idea of evolution?
The evolution of evolution. Well, Darwin was very reticent about publishing his ideas, which is why he sort of sat on it for a long time because of the potential theological or philosophical implications of it. I think people's reactions to it seem to have been mixed. I mean, some people, even religious people, were sort of okay with it. They think, yeah, sure. I mean, God can create however He wants. Whereas others are very. I mean, even today, people talk about descending from monkeys or things like that, which is a misstatement of evolutionary theory. But some people at least seem to have a strong aversion to this idea that humans, which are supposed to be sort of elevated and civilized or whatever, can be descended from these lowly, nasty monkeys. I mean, personally, I don't really see that. It seems obvious that we're continuous with the animal world, and we have greater intelligence and have developed tools and societies that other animals haven't. But biologically there's a lot in common. So I mean, partly it seems just to be how people's predispositions towards rejecting the idea or being uncomfortable with it. I think people have grown more used to it over time. Not everyone, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess you're suggesting a form of naturalism. If you are, do you want to describe what that is? If not, do you want to describe what you're describing?
Naturalism. Well, I mean, you don't have to be a naturalist to believe in evolution by natural selection. Naturalism would be the idea that only the natural world or the physical world exists, so there's no supernatural forces like gods or demons or angels or ghosts or things like that. And I mean, I would tend towards naturalism because I don't believe in any of those things. But I don't think you have to be a naturalist to believe in evolution. There are plenty of Christians who are happy to accept evolution by natural selection, and obviously they're not naturalists because they believe in God. So I think there's been a bit of too much of a conflation of the two issues, whether there's a God or naturalism versus whether natural selection is a good description of how species have diverged. Honestly, I think they're different questions, really.
Yeah, so actually, yeah. Well, I mean, what is the naturalistic worldview, and why is it it's seemingly very compatible with our knowledge about biological natural selection?
Well, natural selection certainly fits very nicely within a naturalist worldview because previous to Darwin publishing his work, people struggled to understand how you could have creatures so complex as animals and humans and other things so well adapted to their environments without there being some intelligence that was shaping this and creating them. And there didn't seem to be a naturalistic way to explain how that could be. But with the development of the theory of natural selection, we now have a mechanism which doesn't rely on any outside influence and purely explains, just in terms of natural forces, genetic mutations and selection of environmental pressures and so on, how the specialization of animals can come to be. So it certainly fits very nicely in a naturalistic worldview. I don't think it rules out the possibility that there could still be gods or whatever else out there, but it doesn't require those, and it provides a nice explanation that sort of makes them unnecessary, I would say, at least in the biological realm.
Right, so I mean, you're a Star Trek fan, and they brought up the idea of some form of panspermia and then guided sort of evolution from a specific form. But I'm not sure if that's the model of a creationist view on biological natural selection. if you were a creationist, how best would you argue for a compatibility there?
Well, creationists typically wouldn't. So, I mean, there are different positions on this. Creationists typically would say that would not accept evolution, at least not common descent through natural selection as Darwinian theory proposes. They may accept a limited amount of variation within sort of closer related animals, but typically they wouldn't accept that humans are descended from, ultimately, well, fish-like organisms, for example, if you go far enough back. But then there are other people who believe that evolution did occur, but it was guided by God or some other intelligent entity, and that's sometimes called theistic evolution. So that's distinct from creationism, which sort of says that God just created species more or less how they are today. I don't really think you can reconcile that form of creationism with evolutionary theory, but I think theistic evolution, naturally, I mean, you can. I would say either of those hypotheses is sort of unnecessary. Natural selection doesn't need a designer, I think. It's sufficient in itself, but it doesn't, as I said before, it doesn't rule out the possibility that there could be. It sort of is just silent on that question. It's irrelevant to it.
Sure. Okay, so what about, why celebrate Darwin Day? What's there to celebrate? It's just, science.
Well,
scientists aren't very, celebratory, don't they? Hang around in, lab coats and occasionally, have a cupcake together in the local canteen, and that's about it.
Well, people don't typically celebrate scientists so much as they celebrate, well, a lot of other people. But I mean, I think we should celebrate scientists more than we typically do. Science makes enormous contributions to how we understand the world in terms of, improving longevity through medical treatments and other things like that, developing technologies that help us to communicate and explore the globe and all sorts of things. So there's all sorts of value to science, practical and also just in terms of the joy of understanding and knowing and exploring the world we live in. And so I think those are ample reasons to celebrate. Darwin is a particularly important scientist because, as I mentioned before, his groundbreaking theories to explain how we can observe the diversity of life emerging and adaptations of particular animals for their specific niches without requiring a supernatural force. So that was a huge intellectual breakthrough, and has since led to enormous amounts of research and improvements and refinements of our understanding of how this can happen. I mean, today basically nothing in biology it can be is explicable without some reference to evolution in some form. So it really underpins everything that we understand about biology these days, the natural animal and plant world. So it's so important. I think it's absolutely worthy of celebrating. And Darwin has an interesting life, and there's a lot of interesting history there to read up on. So I think it makes a good time to celebrate. Think about our place in the world and what we know and what we don't know, and how we can progress and continue on as a species. So I think that's a good reason as any to celebrate.
So an interesting question that I think, what interests me is, what about the future of natural selection, what is the future of natural selection? Or is there a future of natural selection? How big will it be?
Well, so natural selection is, as you alluded to, partly random in that it does rely on random mutations, which are then selected for based on environmental pressures. So in that sense, it's not possible to predict exactly what's going to evolve because you don't know what the mutations might be. However, you can say that natural selection is always occurring. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower. Scientists who've been investigating the genetic variations in human populations find that there's still evolution to this day. That doesn't mean we're going to be growing a third leg anytime soon, but it's in more subtler ways that we do observe continued evolution or natural selection in human and in non-human populations. In terms of the longer term, I mean, it's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen. One big difference that we have today is that the forces of purely natural selection are now, at least in human populations, significantly offset by artificial selection. So that is, we have constructed very elaborate social and technological environments in which we live, which hasn't happened for most of the evolutionary history. So how natural selection is going to operate alongside that is sort of an open question. Today we control human reproduction far more than was ever possible in the past. And so that's going to shape what genetic mutations are selected for and become more prevalent in the population. But exactly in what way, it's very hard to say. It's going to depend on what sort of social policies we adopt for these sorts of things, and how we make decisions about on what basis we should decide whether a pregnancy goes to term or things like this. And this gives rise to a whole host of questions in bioethics and these sorts of things, which are really still quite open, and there's a lot of discussion about these. So ultimately, I think these are questions we're going to have to grapple with more seriously. Because, as I said, now more than ever before, the future of natural selection or of evolution more generally is in our hands to a significant degree, and so it's up to us to do what we can with it to achieve the best outcome for us.
Excellent. Now, is there any points that you actually wanted to bring up or talk about that I didn't raise?
I don't think so. I think we hit on all the main points.
Yeah. Have you got anything nasty, backstabbing, or just kidding? What do you think about the intelligent design movement? What have they got wrong, and where are they being honest, and where do you think they're being dishonest?
Well, I think they're being honest in that typically many who are part of this movement or have predilections towards it will say that they.
Sorry, I'm going to cut in there because I'm going to cut out my rambling to make it more sort of congruent. Do you want to just preface that with the intelligent?
Okay, yeah, sure. So with respect to intelligent design, I think one thing, and the intelligent design movement, one thing that I think they do well, or honestly at least, is that often they are quite explicit about where their starting point is, so where they begin their inquiry with. That is that they start from the presupposition that the Bible is the literal word of God or something along those lines, and then they interpret the evidence from within that framework. So if you start from the presupposition that everything was created 6,000 years ago in 6 days or whatever, then you have to find some way of explaining the fossil evidence and apparent common descent and all these other things within that framework. And then that's what they set out to do. I think the real big problem is that in order to do that, especially if they're young Earth creationists, not all are, but they have to reject a huge amount of scientific discoveries. Not just from biology, but from geology and other similar disciplines in terms of dating of fossils and other things, and a whole host of findings from genetics and comparative morphology of animals and all sorts of other things. And I just think it's very obviously sort of special pleading that they're starting with a conclusion and then trying very hard to make the evidence fit. And that's only going to be compelling to people who really already accept a lot of the beliefs that they're starting from. So I sort of commend them that they're honest about what they're doing, typically, from what I've seen, but I just think that they need to realise, or should realise more often, about how much they're twisting the evidence to fit their presuppositions, and therefore lead them to question their presuppositions and ask, well, how confident can we be that these are true, especially given the apparent enormous conflict that these presuppositions have with, the overwhelming abundance of scientific evidence, particularly with regard to evolution, but other things as well. So basically that's my thoughts on the whole intelligent design thing.
Excellent. All right. That's all the questions I can think of. I can probably think of all of it.
Darwin is a dead man who wrote a very important book that he didn't quite believe in, which has changed the beliefs of countless since he wrote it and published it, and continues to change minds today. His theories weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. They were a far shot closer than anything else at the time, and they're a good yardstick even now. He couldn't possibly have realised the extent to which the theory of evolution would affect our daily lives, paths in science and public policy, parenting decisions, food choices, in that we're all evolved beings and we're just now beginning to find out exactly what our evolution looks like. And so it was quite powerful but almost accidental, like much of great science, happy accidents.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, all right, what do you think about the, what did the theory of natural selection, evolution by natural selection, bring to the plate? I mean, what do we have today that is useful, that you think is a product of us thinking about the world in a very naturalistic sense and using the sort of some of the surface points of natural selection to guide?
I think that the theory has provided a scientific observation and explanation, a gap filler of what we can see. It explains away the watchmaker problem completely. An eyeball is and functions and how it heals itself and how it works. And that's a direct product of evolution. And so he filled in a gap which in turn filled in a number of gaps in regards to why certain things exist, why types of creatures exist. And an insight into the forces that continue to shape us, not as a deliberate changer, but as a tinkerer, something that throws things at the wall, creates 1,000 paintings and chooses one, which is neither good nor bad, but tragic either way, given the inevitable amount of, I suppose, loss of life, be that what in any form, but ultimately resulted in us. And we can take our own evolutionary forces and our environment and our climate and the species in the climate, and we can kill them and we can make them live. We can have an unprecedented amount of executive power over our own lives and the lives of everything around us. And that's growing daily, and I think that's very exciting. Dangerous, but very exciting. So I look forward to what the world looks like when I'm an old man, as old as Darwin was, and what kind of changes I'll have seen.
Excellent. So if you get any, okay, well, what do you think about the intelligent design movement, for instance?
I think intelligent design is another gap, and a god of the gaps is no god at all. Every mystery that's ever been solved has turned out to be not magic, to quote Tim Minchin, and so I think that it's not, superficially, it's quite compelling, but knowledge is not superficial, and so I don't think that there's much knowledge to be contained within any interpretation of intelligent design. I think it's, I suppose, valid in the framework of Christianity or whichever religion it happens to reside, but we do not build skyscrapers with valid engineering models. We build them with sound engineering models. So I suppose it's had its day now. It will never really go away. There will always be anti-vaxxers and other such rabble, but it's important to remember it, but it's not as significant as I think its proponents maybe would wish it was.
Okay, so here we are at Darwin Day. Yes, so why celebrate Darwin Day? Why celebrate Darwin's achievements?
Well, I think that it's useful to have a chance to get together with your community, with like-minded people, bring the kids along. You know, it's a family event, so it's a good chance. It's like you've got Christmas and Easter and Eid and Holi and all those other religiously based festivals and celebrations. So I suppose it's an event where freethinkers and humanists, skeptics, and anyone who really wants to celebrate science and evidence-based thinking and reason to get together and enjoy some time together. And what I like especially about Darwin Day is you can bring the kids. You know, it's a family event. It's something that you can bring your friends to, you know, and learn more about science and free thinking.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, like, that's one thing a lot of religions do have going for them, is that they seem to be really strong communities. But a lot of scientists and free thinkers, you know, sort of run off in their own direction, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of, except for a few examples like Darwin Day, like reasons for them to come together.
Yeah, I think so. Like, you know, like herding cats. And I think we need, as free thinkers, we do need more occasions like this, so that we're not all just single intellectuals, you know, writing blogs independently and, you know, or going to debates or, you know, stuff like that. We want more community-based, family-based festivals, events, and you know, progressive atheists have done a lot to try and encourage those sorts of things. with things like celebrating the solstices, you know, and the not so much the equinox, but just non-faith-based events, and even festivals that are like, I think it's Yalda is an Iranian festival where they have a lot of colourful fruits, and I think the colour is maybe red, and they eat a lot of red food, and so different, you know, celebrating diversity, because I mean atheists come from all different backgrounds, ethnic, nationality, and previous religious backgrounds. So it's just an opportunity to celebrate diversity, bring free thinkers together, and celebrate life, really.
Well, one thing that comes to me, I think about often, is people often conflate the ideas of Darwinistic natural selection. Some Christians might believe that if you take those ideas seriously, then you should believe in survival of the fittest socially, or some form of social Darwinism. But in fact, most people that I know who are like scientists who believe that that evolution by natural selection is a pretty close approximation to the truth, don't necessarily going around like wiping out the weak
I think that evolution has led us as a social being, a human being. We're social animals. 99% of us have the capacity for empathy and moral reasoning, and so it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, your moral reasoning is still going to function, and your compassion is still going to function. And when you see people who are vulnerable and weak, it's a really natural, innate thing to be concerned and want to help them. And I think you'll find a lot of atheists and free thinkers are like that.
Excellent. Okay, so how do you think the ideas of evolution have shaped the modern world by natural selection?
Scientifically, or
well, I mean, scientifically,
or socially.
But also socially. I mean, when you talk about like the medicine and the whole evidence-based, I don't think that necessarily in Darwin, but
Well, I suppose skeptics are born of that sort of culture where evidence-based thinking is valued, and definitely modern medicine is evidence-based, and that's why it's more effective than non-evidence-based cures and remedies that may be just placebo or not effective at all or detrimental. So I think that science overall, it doesn't have a moral aspect to it, but moral people can definitely use it for the betterment of society. Happy Darwin Day. It's great to be here. That's it.
Thanks so much, Alice.
No worries, you're welcome.
What's your thoughts on the importance of Darwin Day?
Darwin Day, well, Darwin described himself as a naturalist, actually, and he was a very important naturalist, and he did a lot of work with Alfred Wallace as well. Both of them really were really colleagues at all. There's one thing about Darwin Day. His family had some inherited diseases, which is quite interesting that people don't really know about them. It's he had inherited diseases from his mother's side of the family, and a lot of them actually died rather young. But he had fits of vomiting and all sorts of stuff during his lifetime. But he managed.
He managed on the Beagle.
Yes, and he certainly managed on the Beagle. The other one, of course, was the famous journey of the Beagle, which was more than 5 years.
Whoops.
Oh dear.
Okay, yep. Yes. Whoops.
think we might have to deal.
Yeah, just leaning back.
Oh dear.
You've had a bit too much to drink. It'll take quite a bit of a gust to come over. Alright. So where were we? We were talking about surviving on the Beagle.
Yes. Now he got one of his uncles. What his father wanted to do was that he wanted him to join the ministry of all things, which Darwin wasn't very keen on. And one of his uncles went and appealed to his father to let him go on the Beagle. And his father agreed. And his journeys on the Beagle were quite legendary. And he also came to Australia. Most people don't realise that he came to it. He went also first to New Zealand, and then he came to Australia. So he thought that in Australia that they wouldn't be able to cross the mountains, and of course they hadn't had railways. You see, that he didn't realise that railways were on the way with George Stephenson. So he went back to England and then found out that George Stephenson had built all these railways, and so.
Okay, how has the theory of biological natural selection shaped medicine and our understanding of biology? Our modern theories of medicine and biology.
Well, one thing that Charles Darwin was quite keen on was bipedalism. He wrote about this in one of his books in 1971, and he thought that we were becoming increasingly bipedal, and he was right. He realised that we were becoming increasingly bipedal, and he also knew that we were making tools as well. He considered gorillas and chimpanzees to be our common ancestors. That's what he wrote in 1871, and he was essentially right. There's a problem with gorillas and chimpanzees that I'll just put it this way: hominids have a common ancestor, and they have 48 chromosomes. And hominins have 46, and it was all the fault of the chimpanzees doing this. They had, so we've actually split off from the chimpanzee line. And the chimpanzees and the gorillas are known as hominids, and we are known as hominins, and we only have 46 chromosomes. And we also became very bipedal at that time. The one, I was just watching a program about Homo erectus this morning actually, and Homo erectus was very curious because they were very bipedal. The problem with species before Homo erectus is that they didn't have very large brains. But Homo erectus had acquired over time a very large brain indeed. And they are ancestral to us. But Homo sapiens have what is called a globular brain. Most people don't seem to know about this actually. Homo sapiens have a globular brain, and Neanderthals and so forth do not have this globular brain. Which means that we are rather special. We're actually a derived species, whereas the Neanderthals and the chimpanzees were ancestral species. So A derived species means that we're split off from the others, essentially. Well, I enjoy coming to these Darwin Day things. You see, Darwin Day is a bit of a movable feast. So we had one on Tuesday night, but the Darwin Day is actually today. So we had one with the Progressive Atheists, but it's on Tuesday night. But the Darwin Day is, as I said, it's something of a movable feast. So it depends which day it's on.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks heaps. That was awesome.
I think Darwin represents someone who was able to change his mind in a huge and important way, who had a certain way of looking at the world that he'd inherited and came across evidence and had the background knowledge and the curiosity to explore that. And when it came up against cherished beliefs which he'd inherited, he was willing to question those beliefs rather than simply throw away the threatening idea. And I think just that on that level is tremendously important and something we can learn from personally and as a society. It's also had a huge impact in terms of what his theory, his ideas about evolution have actually taught us. They've given us a much greater understanding of the natural world, how things are related, how things develop, why things are the way they are, which I'm not a medical person. I would imagine that's tremendously important for understanding how the body works, why it works the way it does, and treatments that might make sense accordingly. It's also provided a pattern for many other things that we, rather than trying to get our ideas from a sacred book, that we look at the world and examine it. I mean, he certainly wasn't the first to do that, but he took it to a much greater degree than had really happened before, and challenged things to a much greater degree than had been done before. So yeah.
What about like Darwin Day as like a social event? What's the significance there? I mean, there are a lot of other social events like Easter, Christmas.
Yeah.
A lot of events about remembering war heroes and like going to war. Why celebrate science?
I think science is foundational to our society, and it's something we often don't appreciate enough. So having a recognition of Darwin and other great scientists is certainly more important than the attention we give to sport, for example. Tends to occupy much more of our attention as a society in terms of our social energy. And when we talk about heroes, we tend to think of war heroes or people who've laid down their lives in other ways. And not to diminish those, I mean, they may or may not be great people, but scientists who've advanced our understanding and thereby enabled us to roll back the scourge of death in terms of disease, whether it's through medicine or proper plumbing, public health, or whatever, or just given us the basis to be able to understand and manipulate the world we live in, and also to potentially have a good life without destroying the world we live in. To give us these powers, that's required an understanding of science. So those who've been pioneers in science, I think, deserve recognition. perhaps as their dues, but to me most importantly as something that's important for us to reflect on and to honour, that when we raise up a younger generation and when we talk about what we value as society, these are the people and these are the things we should be pointing to as much as anything else, if not more. Certainly it's interesting when we look at nature and we look at evolutionary processes that there are ideas we can find there and apply, and there's a guy in Melbourne who I believe is from North America anyway, I believe the US, called Mark Elliott, who did his PhD in around the idea of stigmergy, the concept of how ants, for example, work together by simple rules without needing a leadership, and that there are these processes which operate without a governing mind, without a governing designer, and yet are very powerful. And just to go on a tangent, it reminds me a little of when ice forms and forms beautiful crystals, that's happening without an intelligence directing those specific crystals. That's just the way the water molecules work together. And in a sense, we are vastly more complex versions of the same thing that we've formed out of the building blocks of matter and form something incredibly complex. And then within our society, taking some of those principles of the principles of how an ant colony might work, and saying, well, maybe that helps us to understand how Wikipedia works, for example. There's very little in terms of top-down control or design, but there are rules which have developed which enable things to operate more or less effectively. So those sort of perspectives are useful, I think. Engineering does usually operate from the perspective of having a designer. So it's a very different thing, and I wouldn't say that one is superior to the other, it's simply different. But the advantage that evolution has had is that it's had billions of years to operate, and certainly in terms of multicellular life it's had more than 500 million years, and that gives you a lot of time to try things, particularly when you're dealing with microorganisms that might have an extremely short generation. So you have a vast number of generations within a single year, and so you have this incomprehensibly large number of generations, and just through these iterative undesigned processes, a vast number of things are tried, and over that time, some pretty good designs come out, some pretty good solutions. So the idea of biomimicry is very interesting, of taking solutions from evolution, from nature, how biological organisms have, you could say, solved problems. It's not implying that someone with a mind has solved a problem, it's just that this is the pattern that has survived. This particular design is one that has been the fittest line of organisms in a particular context, and so that's a tremendous source of what you might call wisdom. I think combining that with the intelligence that we've ended up with, being able to actually direct design. I mean, it's hard for evolution to come up with certain solutions. It can't take jumps. It can only move through incremental change. It can't take very big jumps anyway. So and you see that in certain designs, like the nerve that runs down the neck of a giraffe from the top of the neck down, sort of around somewhere, some artery, I think, near the collarbone, whatever it is, and then back all the way up the neck. That happens because the design happened incrementally. And as an intelligent designer, you don't make those sort of, I won't say mistakes, but you don't create a design that way, and so you can take a sensible shortcut. So, yeah, I think combine the two, they're both fantastic.
Fantastic. Right. Is there any concluding remarks you'd like to make about Darwin Day?
Socially, it's very different to a lot of what I do. I hang around with hippies a lot, with the Confest crowd, and I really love that. I love the values. I love a lot of what they stand for. Some of the people in that crowd appreciate science, and there are scientists among them. And we've got a science village happening, as you know, the Uncertainty Village, and that's going to be a lot of fun this Easter. But yeah, I think that the hippies and those sort of seeking the spiritual values or whatever often have a lot of wisdom, but can also become misguided and go down blind alleys because they have unrealistic ideas about how the world works, how the universe works. And so they'll anthropomorphize the universe and have these ideas about sending vibrations out with their mind, sending thoughts out. And so I think that's an area where you might have great values, but having a misunderstanding of the nature of things can lead you into some poor choices. Whereas here, this is just an opportunity to meet some different people. I haven't been along to a lot of these things, but it's nice to come along and meet some people who share interests and throw some ideas around, learn a few things.
Awesome, Chris. It's been great having you. Here we are at Darwin Day. Francesca, you got something?
Yes. So, there are pests that threaten our crops. So we have to create buffer zones to prevent them from evolving resistance to the pesticides we use. And how big do those buffer zones need to be? There are pathogens, bacteria, that evolve resistance to the antibiotics we use. And how often do we use those antibiotics? How much? Which intervals do we have to wait before we start again? The ways we keep ourselves healthy, the ways we keep ourselves fed, are very much dependent on the numerical prediction of evolutionary theory. So without this guy here, we wouldn't eat as we eat today, we wouldn't live as long. So it has very practical impacts on our lives. So this is why I think it's very important. Yeah, but most people don't realize. We see saying evolution is just a theory. It is just a theory with a very solid numerical background and whose application are very important economically for our civilization, for our technology, for our food, for our medicines.
Excellent. Yeah. Is that it?
That's it.
Well, are you having fun time at Darwin Day?
Yeah, chatting around, interesting people, weird discussions.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, it's the spice of life. Okay. All right, so Darwin Day, here we are. What's the significance of Darwin Day to you?
I suppose, whether it's Darwin himself or evolution as a whole, it's changed the human worldview somewhat. Just to think about life and realise that we're all related to every other organism on the planet. I find that somewhat mind-blowing, and I'm standing here holding a mushroom and barbecuing them, along with some steaks, and I think that, you know, me and that steak shared a common ancestor about 50 million years ago, and me and this mushroom shared a common ancestor about 1 billion years ago. I didn't touch the kale, so I can't push this any further on the occasion, but I'm just amazed to feel interconnected with all of life.
Comparably, what do you like better, steak or mushroom?
Well, I think the kids like steak, but I'm quite partial to mushrooms, to be honest.
I mean, okay, so let's talk about like the discovery of biological natural selection by Darwin and Wallace as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there's no Wallace Day. Poor guy. I mean,
Well,
do you feel bad? Like,
the trouble with Wallace, I think he went a bit off the rails later in life. He became an anti-vaccinationist. You know, he was opposed. I think he was opposed to the smallpox vaccine. I think Darwin ended on a high note. So I suppose.
Darwin.
I suppose. And so here we are. Kids are colouring in Darwin today rather than Wallace.
Show us the colour in. Like, leave it up there for a while so we can see it properly. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Nice one, mate.
Will be the mixed up.
Yes, you've managed to put facial hair on all the places he didn't actually have facial hair. He only had the huge sideburns at that age. But nothing like innovation, is there?
We're totally messing it up.
That's okay. You're messing up Darwin Day, kids. Oh,
Yeah.
fun and games.
Well, you know,
Okay, let's
it's
talk
another
about-
10 months before you can spoil Christmas. You know, you've got to do something.
Okay, so okay, let's talk. Okay, so what is it about natural selection by evolution that's so significant about today's science and discoveries in biology and by association medicine?
Well, I suppose first and foremost, just knowing that, you know, a human cell and human biology is qualitatively the same as animal biology, and that there's a whole continuum of life that, you know, the building blocks are the same for bacteria as they are for us, means that, you know, we could scientifically understand, take all those other organisms and get a scientific understanding of human biology. That's perhaps something at the fundamental level. When you know, prior to that belief that humans were another organism that had, you know, a product of that evolution, you know, we're always seen as some kind of special case. But so it's really opened up the research a lot to drop that kind of preposition.
Product of natural selection. There's got to be a reason behind that sort of behaviour.
Yeah. I'm okay, thanks. I'm okay.
Okay.
Well, that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, better watch out for that. Okay.
All right, you can have one. You're going to bounce off the ceiling tonight.
Oh yeah, I love doing that.
Okay. Watch out for your feet.
Yes.
There's a couple shots there.
Okay. All right. Do you want to be in the video? You're not on the video. You're not tall enough.
You got to be in or out. You're just trolling if you're just bouncing around.
Nice hair.
He has a couple shots.
Do you think Darwin had hair like that when he was a kid?
No.
All right. So okay. Oh, he's a performer, isn't he?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about well, let's talk about the intelligent design movement then.
What do I think about the movement? I think it was an attempt to put some constraints on creationists to make them, you know, perhaps for public relations reasons, to make them look a bit more plausible, to make them look a bit more intellectual, to take the overt theology out of what they were talking about and the biblical fundamentalism. That, you know, there were some reasonably intelligent people involved in that movement, you know, some biologists and mathematicians, and but fundamentally I don't think they had anything to offer, any from a scientific point of view. They didn't offer any novel predictions that to evolutionary theory. I don't think there's anything, you know, if you took an intelligent design line, it didn't offer you any alternative research program, any alternative way of interpreting experiments. So I think it's still a scientific dead end in that respect, as much as creationism is.
Okay. So, yeah, there was like a big sort of court case around this a while ago, where we had intelligent design advocates trying to rule that it should be, I don't know the details, but something like share equal time with natural selection in science classes. Do you know much about that?
Put slightly on the spot, I do recall a case like that. We're talking early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, that's...
And I think it all happens in various county level or district level education systems in the US, and usually in southern states where they have these challenges, and they appear to be a semi-regular kind of thing in that type of education system. I think, I mean, my recollection of the that particular challenge that was kind of classed as being intelligent design rather than creationism was that it started off very well with all the advocates of intelligent design sounding very professional about it, but they started, I think they lost a wheel off their wagon when they're in the courtroom, and they had one of their spokespeople say, look, you know, Jesus died on a cross for our sins. Doesn't that mean anything in this courtroom? And it was fairly apparent that it was a PR attempt to get some form of creationism into a palatable form of creationism, or albeit, you know, without a specific creed behind it, into classrooms. So I think we just need to be wary and understand the motives for people like that.
All right, now, so we have a few skeptics here today. Terry Kelly, and you're the president of the, ex-skeptic president. Now you're the president here at Darwin Day. What does Darwin Day offer to skeptics? What does skeptics have to contribute to Darwin Day, either way?
Well, I think, I mean, generally, you know, aside from the happy children, we tend to, I think we just look forward to a day where we can spend some time with other free thinkers, with humanists and rationalists, and you know, the secular society from the uni, and atheists, and get together and talk about things that interest us. Charles Darwin comes up a bit in conversation, but a lot of the other pressing free-thinking concerns come up a lot too. Organising our conventions, worrying about persecuted freethinkers in other countries. We've all been very busy catching up today and talking about these things.
Okay. Well, okay. So have you got like a I don't know, an elevator speech about skepticism and the skeptics movement that you'd like to talk about, that, you know, has relevance to Darwin Day, natural selection, or Charles Darwin himself?
Well, hello. There's another beautiful illustration of my point. what I think we need to be evolutionary with our theories and be prepared to throw away beliefs that don't work and replace them with ones that do meet the evidence that we encounter. That's what Darwin and evolution really mean to skepticism. Keep your beliefs as tentative theories and be prepared to cast them away.
So it's not. Is it exactly like choosing theories by their survivability? Because there's a lot of memes out there that I think are kind of counterproductive. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's not,
I think. Well, I think. In a sense, I guess you could say there's a lot of theories that are discredited that still survive. Felix, it's getting beyond a joke now. In a sense, you could say that there are, you could point to plenty of discredited theories, such as homeopathy, that have been, that people still adhere to after hundreds of years of debunking. But I think that's a case of people not being evolutionary in their beliefs. These kind of non-empirical theories. It's a challenge to an evolutionary process, and it's often it's some kind of faith or comfort that's going on.
do you think faith has selective advantage?
I think faith certainly does have selective advantage. Yeah.
All right, rolling. So yes.
The first time I learned about Charles Darwin, I was in Argentina. I was a young girl in the school, and here I was confronted with a book that was telling me the things that I thought about it. Not that I thought about it, it's just that I never was a religious person. I couldn't believe in all that. Charles Darwin brought to my mind a kind of questioning that brought the whole thing. Because if there is a God, if there is a God that created the man to his image, he also created bacteria, virus, you name it, disease, just to kill that particular man that he created to his image. I thought the whole thing was stupid. Then, after reading the things of Darwin, I start to look and I say, well, let's face it, the cat is acting like the humans, the dogs love me like this, the animals are really suffering the same of humans. It could be right, you know, he could be right. And slowly, and then I come to Australia. The Catholics were minority. 50 years ago, I arrived to Australia in April 1966. It was Easter. Everything was closed. The music was all, you know. And I thought, oh no, it can't be true. I come out of the Catholics and now the English are the same. But slowly, until I meet and stay with the progressive atheist. And that changed my life because everything makes sense. Not only makes sense, I was not scared to discuss it. I was not scared to talk to other people. Now I am even going around with the t-shirt, Proudly Atheist. And that is something that we have to preserve. Because we want the religion to have their freedom, but we also want freedom from religion. That doesn't mean we want to kill each other. That doesn't mean we are going to go and do all sorts of things. But yes, we need to be respected. If they want us respect, then they want to be respected. So they had to get rid of the stupidities of things they have. Like, for example, if I go to court and I had to sign on the Bible, as much as well sign in Harry Potter, it wouldn't make any difference to me. To go to council, I become a counselor, and to pray for God to help me to make the decisions. So it means all those things that I read and prepare and research, bag it all. I just have to pray to God to help me to make the decision, and it's so crazy. So I believe in the secular system. I believe that we have to respect if the people have a religion, but also we have to be respected. Or I pay tax and I pay rate. Why they don't? They should pay income tax, they should pay land tax, they should pay rate. Because religion is their business. Religion is their business. So every business should do that. It should pay. Why should we pay for that business? We don't pay for all the business. Why should we pay for them? I sincerely believe that many people now, they haven't read really about Charles Darwin, because it's amazing what these men did. And the doubts, and the scare, the fears. I had to say something. He did have an excellent wife. She worked hard to give him the room and the time for him to do that. And in the meantime, they were having fun. They have 10 children. 10 children, oh, not bad, 10 children. So, it's okay. It's okay. So today I am with the atheists, the humanists, the skeptics, the whoever, having a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alida. That was amazing. Yeah. Darwin Day, here we are. And what's your name, sorry?
Sirius.
Sirius, yeah? Like the Sirius as in the Greek god?
Yes, star.
And the star? So yeah, he's a funny looking bloke, isn't he? If he was a bit fatter.
Yeah, and I slapped some, white and red clothes on him, then he's Santa, basically.
But does he give away presents?
Well, I don't really know what he did, so I don't know.
He's a scientist. Do you know about science, don't you?
Yeah,
A little bit?
So I guess he did give away presents. Presents of science.
That's it. And that's important, isn't it?
Because it could be like a cure for a disease or something.
Yeah.